Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a less celebrated side of India's scientific journey.
Hmm.
Beyond the well-known achievements, our sources reveal a history marked by, suppression, ethical dilemmas, and societal repercussions, offering hopefully a richer understanding for you.
Exactly. It's about seeing the full picture. Colonialism and internal structures like the caste system really profoundly shaped India's scientific path.
Right. Let's maybe start with colonial science then. The impact wasn't just political. British rule actively undermined India's existing knowledge systems, often for economic gain, right? And it was fueled by this belief in Western superiority.
Absolutely. They pretty much dismissed Indian advancements as, well, superstition or magic, not real science in their eyes.
This imposition of Western thought, it led to a significant loss, almost like a loss of intellectual diversity, as one source put it.
Yeah, like losing biodiversity, but for worldviews. Think about Thomas Macaulay, who famously basically said all of Indian literature wasn't worth a single shelf of European books, that kind of attitude.
Wow. And this wasn't just talk, was it? Indian scientists faced real, tangible discrimination.
Oh, definitely. I mean, India actually had some of the first engineering schools in the British Empire, but contributions from Indian scientists were often just ignored or minimized.
Yeah, like the case of Ronald Ross and Kishori Mohan Bandyopadhyay. Ross got the Nobel Prize for malaria research.
But barely acknowledged Bandyopadhyay's crucial work. It fits that narrative that Indians supposedly lacked the aptitude for precise science.
And colonial powers also manipulated technology for their own benefit, didn't they?
Yeah.
Particularly in industries like textiles and metallurgy.
Exactly. They passed laws specifically designed to cripple Indian manufacturers, basically forcing them out of business. And then there was the massive exploitation of natural resources, like huge-scale logging. It was all about control and profit.
Okay, so that's the colonial impact. But turning inward, what about internal impediments? Our sources point strongly to the rigid caste system.
Yes, that was a major, major barrier. Upper castes often actively restricted lower castes' access to education, including scientific knowledge. It was about maintaining social control.
The fear was that knowledge could upset the hierarchy.
Precisely. If lower castes gained scientific understanding, it could challenge the established social order. There was little incentive for innovation among elites who relied on lower caste labor anyway.
So instead, the focus sometimes shifted to religious scholarship or even pseudosciences like astrology among some upper castes.
Right, and knowledge within manufacturing castes often stayed confined within families or guilds, which really hindered broader dissemination and progress. Praful Chandra Ray, he pointed this out, blaming the Brahmin monopoly on knowledge and caste inequalities for science declining.
Although there were periods that challenged this, like early Buddhist movements, right? But then rigidity increased later, say, under the Gupta dynasty.
It fluctuated, yeah. And then there's the entanglement of religious beliefs with scientific inquiry itself. Sometimes religious dogma just, well, constrained critical analysis.
Like rejecting scientific views that contradicted beliefs. The example of resistance to Aryabhata and Brahmagupta's correct explanations of eclipses comes to mind.
Exactly. Astrologers pushed back hard. And even today, there's sometimes this tendency to try and claim modern scientific discoveries were already in ancient religious texts, which can distort understanding and hinder critical thinking.
It raises that difficult question. Did past achievements sometimes lead to a sort of complacency? One source mentioned vainglory.
It's a possibility, yeah. A sense that ancient India had already figured everything out could potentially stifle new inquiry.
Our sources also highlight ethical crossroads, instances of misconduct throughout India's scientific history, not just recently.
Right. The Sharbati-Sonora wheat strain controversy is a key example. There were exaggerated claims from MS Swaminathan's group, and an inquiry later found, well, unsubstantiated data.
And the tragic suicide linked to that. Vinod H. Shah, an agronomist who protested unscientific data. It really highlights the pressures.
It does. Pressure on junior scientists, senior scientists maybe taking undue credit. And then there are things like the plagiarism controversy involving Professor B.S. Rajput. It shows the need for robust oversight.
Historically, there wasn't always a strong body to investigate misconduct, though organizations like the Society for Scientific Values tried to fill that gap.
Yeah. And while ancient texts like the Karaka and Susruta Samhitas laid out strong ethical frameworks for medicine compassion, selfless service, there's a perception that maybe Western influence and commercialization led to some decline.
Plus, contemporary issues like ethics dumping, where foreign researchers might exploit less stringent regulations. That Indian cervical cancer screening trial raised serious questions about informed consent.
Definitely concerning. Moving on, ignorance itself has had calamitous consequences, hasn't it? A lack of scientific understanding often worsen the impact of natural disasters.
Absolutely. Think about historical famines, like the Bengal famine of 1943. Limited understanding of food security, coupled with, frankly, detrimental policies, played a huge role.
And destructive cyclones like Bola in 1970 or Orissa in 1999. Forecasting and evacuation have improved dramatically since then, thankfully, showing the value of scientific understanding.
Earthquakes, too, like Gujarat in 2001, understanding seismic risks and implementing proper building codes is vital.
And of course, the Bhopal gas tragedy in '84, a truly catastrophic example of negligence, inadequate safety measures, and just a fundamental lack of understanding of industrial hazards by those in charge.
There was maybe a historical tendency to just see disasters as unavoidable acts of God, which hindered proactive steps.
Right. Thankfully, the focus has shifted more towards preparedness, risk reduction, and using technology, like with the establishment of the National Disaster Management Authority.
Okay, another difficult area. Science and social divisions. How has science been involved in entrenching divides based on caste, gender, or religion?
Well, we already touched on the caste system restricting access to education, but there are also concerns about potential caste biases within the scientific community itself. Some analyses even talk about science in India having a kind of Brahmanical identity.
And the gender bias is undeniable, isn't it? A significant and enduring underrepresentation of women in science historically, and challenges continue today.
Absolutely. And while maybe less explicitly documented in some sources, religious discrimination can also play a role, especially when it comes to promoting certain types of knowledge or pseudoscientific claims favored by certain groups.
Which brings us to pseudoscience and misinformation. These seem like recurring problems with potentially serious harm.
Definitely. Astrology has always held sway, but recently there's been a worrying trend of promoting pseudoscientific claims often linked to religious nationalism, trying to, glorify ancient India uncritically.
Yeah, we've seen examples even at the Indian Science Congress, unfortunately, where unsubstantiated claims have been given a platform.
And the promotion of unscientific health practices, certain Ayurvedic treatments without evidence, or cow urine therapy, sometimes even with government backing through bodies like the Ministry of AYUSH, that's drawn criticism.
And misinformation spreads so fast now, especially through social media.
Incredibly fast. And it can be weaponized, targeting minorities or inciting violence. Low digital literacy makes people more vulnerable too. We saw this during COVID-19, right? Lots of false information about cures and prevention.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Finally, let's talk about power dynamics, the relationship between science and power structures.
It's always been there. Under colonial rule, science was definitely a tool for asserting authority, controlling resources, and justifying dominance.
And in independent India, the state invested heavily in science for national development and, well, legitimacy. But this sometimes led to power being concentrated in certain establishments.
Right, which can potentially limit scrutiny, maybe in sensitive areas like the nuclear program. There are concerns about dissenting opinions being suppressed sometimes.
And the potential for misuse of power by senior scientists or systemic failures to address misconduct, as we discussed earlier.
And more recently, there's growing concern about direct political interference and the promotion of ideological agendas within scientific institutions, this idea of saffronizing science.
So, wrapping up, it's clear India's scientific history is really complex, a mix of incredible triumphs and these darker aspects, these tribulations.
Yeah. The legacies of colonial exploitation and internal inequalities, like the caste system, they still cast long shadows. And the threats from pseudoscience, misinformation, and potential abuses of power are very real today.
Understanding these complexities, these shadows, seems crucial if we want to build a more ethical, inclusive, and frankly rigorous scientific future. Not just in India, but globally.
Absolutely. It's about learning from the past, the good and the bad.
So we'll leave our listeners with this thought. How can we, as individuals, get better at evaluating the information we encounter? How do we challenge misinformation effectively in our own lives and communities, all in the pursuit of genuine knowledge?